So we've got Jesus riding on a donkey into Jerusalem over this pathway of strewn garments. But we need two more details to complete the scene. The first is that the crowd shout, "Hosanna to the descendant of David. Hosanna to the King David's son." And the second thing is that the crowds, both in front and behind, they cut down branches from palm trees to wave them as improvised flags and banners. Two things there. The crowds refer to Jesus as the son of David, the descendant of King David. Now, David was arguably the finest, the best, the greatest king that Israel had ever had. This is now about 1,000 years before Jesus. So we're going even further back in the history of the Jewish people. The crowds, they are hoping, expecting, anticipating, wanting to believe that Jesus is going to be a kind of second King David Mark II. So that's implicit in calling him the son of David. And then the second thing was the palms that they waved. Why did they do that? Again, the people are reaching back in a third way back into their history. They've gone back to reference Jehu, 840 years earlier, with the carpet of cloaks and coats. They've referenced David quite explicitly, and that was 1,000 years earlier. And now with the palm branches, they're only going back a mere 200 years or so in their history to reference a third great hero of theirs. This was a man called Judas Maccabeus. Now, at this time, 200 years before Jesus, it wasn't the Romans who were occupying and oppressing Israel. It was the Greeks. You may have heard of Alexander the Great. Well, a man called Judas Maccabeus led a violent uprising against these Greek invaders, these conquerors. He was a brilliant military leader, a strategist, a tactician. He was a guerrilla fighter. The Jews, of course, called him a freedom fighter. The Greeks called him a terrorist. Now, when he was eventually triumphant, victorious, when he rode into Jerusalem, again, somebody else riding into Jerusalem, what do you think the people did to celebrate? They cut the palm branches down and they waved these fronds, these very flexible long fingers of palm leaves as a flag, as a sign of welcome and honour to this king who'd been a resistance fighter. So the crowds in our reading today are referencing three great heroes from their past. In chronological order, there's King David 1,000 years ago. He made Jerusalem the seat of government, the capital of the country, and that's 1,000 years earlier. He was a good king. Then they're thinking of Jehu, 840 years earlier, who was set up as king by the people and by God in opposition to the official, oppressive and evil king. And of course that was done with the cloaks and the coats being placed under him. And then a little bit more recently in time again, they're referencing 200 years ago, Judas Maccabeus, who defeated the Greeks through his guerrilla warfare tactics and was celebrated with the waving of palm fronds and branches. Each of these three men have three things in common. They were men of violence who defeated the enemies of God through military might. Secondly, they were regarded as folk heroes by the people of Jesus' day. They still are. Thirdly, they all rode into Jerusalem in triumphant victory through those same gates in that same city wall. And this tells you everything you need to know about what the crowds are hoping and expecting of Jesus. The weight and the burden of their desire on Jesus is that he will be like those three men, that he will do the same as they did and achieve it through the same means. They're thinking, Jesus doesn't just ride an ass, he's going to kick some ass too. Whose ass is he going to kick? Well, there's the occupying Roman army. There's the puppet regime of King Herod. There's the corrupt clergy. There's all the oppression of the poor. Jesus is going to sweep it all away, just like these three illustrious predecessors. Except, is he? And if he is, how is he going to? I'd like to end with a reading from Tom Wright's book, Matthew for Everyone. Tom Wright is an Anglican bishop and he's a professor of New Testament Greek. So really he outranks me in pretty much every way. He's also a really nice guy, which is great. Now, rather than try and equal Tom Wright, I thought, well, I might as well just take you straight to the source, and I'm going to quote the man himself. So the bit I'm about to read out is from his book, N.T. Wright's book, Matthew for Everyone. What Jesus knows, and what Matthew has already told us, is that Jesus is going to Jerusalem not to be enthroned like David, or like Judas Maccabeus, or like Herod. He is going to Jerusalem to be killed. The meaning Jesus attaches to this so-called triumphal entry into the city is quite different from the meaning that the crowds are wanting to see in it. And that perhaps is where we can learn the most from our story today. People turn to God notoriously when there is something they want very badly. Of course, that's like finally deciding how to use a telephone only when you urgently need to call an ambulance. It would have been sensible to have worked it out earlier, when it wasn't quite so important. But that's how people are. Church attendance goes up in leaps and bounds when a major crisis strikes, a war, say, or an earthquake. Suddenly, everyone wants to ask the big, hard questions. Suddenly, everyone wants Jesus, in terms of this story, to ride into the city and become the sort of king they want him to be. Give us peace now. Pay my bills and hurry. Save the life of my sick child and do it right away. Give me a job by this time tomorrow. And perhaps the most common prayer of all, help, help. Now, Jesus does intend to answer these and other prayers. He doesn't wait for our motives to be pure. He doesn't wait for us to have sorted out our lives to the point where we can look him in the face, eye to eye, as it were, and do business with him. Of course he doesn't. Jesus has come to seek and to rescue the lost. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. However, at the same time, Jesus answers us in his own way. The people wanted a prophet, but this prophet would tell them that the city was under God's imminent judgment. The people wanted a Messiah, but this one was going to be enthroned on a pagan cross. The people wanted to be rescued from evil and oppression, and Jesus is going to rescue them from evil in its fullest depths, not just the surface level evil of Roman occupation and the exploitation by the rich. Precisely because Jesus says yes to their desires at the deepest level, he will have to say no or wait to their desires that they are conscious of and are able to express. That's the funny thing with prayer. Once you invite Jesus to help, he will do so more thoroughly than you imagined, more deeply than perhaps you actually wanted. The story of Jesus' grand, though surprising, entry into Jerusalem is an object lesson in the mismatch between our expectations and God's answer. The bad news is that the crowds are going to be disappointed. But the good news is that their disappointment, although cruel, is only at the surface level. Deep down, Jesus' arrival at the great city is indeed the moment when salvation is dawning. The hosannas were justified, but not for the reasons that the crowd had supposed. To learn this lesson is to take a large step towards wisdom and humility, towards genuine Christian faith. Amen. Just a reminder, I hope you'll be able to collect your palm cross from outside the church tomorrow. And if you want to see the second part, the other part of this service, which is the prayers and the communion, just look out for that link and click on it. May God bless you.